Chapter 5. When she opened her eyes at last and sat up, Haste scrambled quickly to his feet and went to pick up her cork helmet, which she had rolled a little way off. Meanwhile she busied herself in doing up her hair, plaited on the top of her head in two heavy dark tresses which had come loose. He tendered her the helmet in silence, and waited as if unwilling to hear the sound of his own voice. "We had better go down now," he suggested in a low tone. He extended his hand to help her up. He had the intention to smile, but abandoned it at the nearer sight of her still face, in which was depicted the infinite lassitude of her soul. On their way to regain the forest path, they had to pass through the spot from which the view of the sea could be obtained. The flaming abyss of emptiness, the liquid undulating glare, the tragic brutality of the light made her long for the friendly night, with its stars stilled by an austere spell, for the velvety dark sky and the mysteriously great shadow of the sea, conveying peace to the day-weary heart. She put her hand to her eyes. Behind her back Haste spoke gently. "Let us get on, Lena." She walked ahead in silence. Haste remarked that they had never been out before during the hottest hours. It would do her no good, he feared. This solicitude pleased and soothed her. She felt more and more like herself, a poor London girl playing in an orchestra, and snatched out from the humiliations, the squalid dangers of a miserable existence, by a man like whom there could not be another in this world. She felt this with elation, with uneasiness, with an intimate pride, and with a peculiar sinking of the heart. "I am not easily knocked out by any such thing as heat," she said decisively. "Yes, but I don't forget that you're not a tropical bird." "You weren't born in these parts either," she returned. "No, and perhaps I haven't even your physique. I am a transplanted being. Transplanted! I ought to call myself uprooted, an unnatural state of existence. But a man is supposed to stand anything." She looked back at him and received a smile. He told her to keep in the shelter of the forest path, which was very still and close, full of heat if free from glare. Now and then they had glimpses of the company's old clearing, blazing with light, in which the black stumps of trees stood charred, without shadows, miserable and sinister. They crossed the open in a direct line for the bungalow. On the veranda they fancied they had a glimpse of the vanishing Wang, though the girl was not at all sure they had seen anything move. Haste had no doubts. "Wang has been looking for us. We are late." "Was he? I thought I saw something white for a moment, and then I didn't see it any more." "That's it. He vanishes. It's a very remarkable gift in that Chinaman." "Are they all like that?" she asked with naive curiosity and uneasiness. "Not in such perfection," said Haste, amused. He noticed with approval that she was not heated by the walk. The drops of perspiration on her forehead were like dew on the cool white petal of a flower. He looked at her figure of grace and strength, solid and supple, with an ever-growing appreciation. "Go in and rest yourself for a quarter of an hour, and then Mr. Wang will give us something to eat," he said. They had found the table laid. When they came together again and sat down to it, Wang materialized without a sound, unheard, uncalled, and did his office, which being accomplished at a given moment he was not. A great silence brooded over Samburan, the silence of the great heat that seems pregnant with fatal issues, like the silence of ardent thought. Haste remained alone in the big room. The girls, seeing him take up a book, had retreated to her chamber. Haste sat down under his father's portrait, and the abominable calumny crept back into his recollection. The taste of it came on his lips, nauseating and corrosive, like some kinds of poison. He was tempted to spit on the floor, naively, in sheer unsophisticated disgust of the physical sensation. He shook his head, surprised at himself. He was not used to receive his intellectual impressions in that way, reflected in movements of carnal emotion. He stirred impatiently in his chair, and raised the book to his eyes with both hands. It was one of his father's. He opened it haphazard, and his eyes fell on the middle of the page. The elder Haste had written of everything in many books, of space and of time, of animals and of stars, analysing ideas and actions, the laughter and the frowns of men, and the grimaces of their agony. The son read, shrinking into himself, composing his face as if under the author's eye, with a vivid consciousness of the portrait on his right hand, a little above his head. A wonderful presence in its heavy frame on the flimsy wall of mats, looking exiled and at home, out of place and masterful in the painted immobility of profile. And Haste the son read, "Of the stratagems of life the most cruel is the consolation of love, the most subtle too, for the desire is the bed of dreams." He turned the pages of the little volume Storm and Dust, glancing here and there at the broken text of reflections, maxims, short phrases, enigmatical sometimes and sometimes eloquent. It seemed to him that he was hearing his father's voice, speaking and ceasing to speak again. Startled at first, he ended by finding a charm in the illusion. He abandoned himself to the half-belief that something of his father dwelt yet on earth, a ghostly voice, audible to the ear of his own flesh and blood. With what strange serenity, mingled with terrors, had that man considered the universal nothingness! He had plunged into it headlong, perhaps to render death the answer that faced one at every inquiry more supportable. Haste stirred, and the ghostly voice ceased, but his eyes followed the words on the last page of the book. Men of tormented conscience, or of a criminal imagination, are aware of much that minds of a peaceful, resigned cast do not even suspect. It is not poets alone who dare descend into the abyss of infernal regions, or even who dream of such a descent. The most inexpressive of human beings must have said to himself at one time or another, "Anything but this." We all have our instance of clairvoyance. They are not very helpful. The character of the scheme does not permit that, or anything else, to be helpful. Properly speaking, its character, judged by the standards established by its victims, is infamous. It excuses every violence of protest, and at the same time never fails to crush it, just as it crushes the blindest dissent. The so-called wickedness must be, like the so-called virtue, its own reward, to be anything at all. Clairvoyance or no clairvoyance, men love their captivity. To the unknown force of negation they prefer the miserably tumbled bed of their servitude. Man alone can give one the disgust of pity. Yet I find it easier to believe in the misfortune of mankind than in its wickedness. These were the last words. Haste lowered the book to his knees. Lena's voice spoke above his drooping head. "You sit there as if you were unhappy." "I thought you were asleep," he said. "I was lying down right enough, but I never closed my eyes. The rest would have done you good after our walk. Didn't you try?" "I was lying down, I tell you, but sleep I couldn't. And you made no sound. What want of sincerity! Or did you want to be alone for a time?" "I? Alone?" she murmured. He noticed her eyeing the book, and got up to put it back in the bookcase. When he turned round, he saw that she had dropped into the chair. It was the one she always used, and looked as if her strength had suddenly gone away from her, leaving her only her youth, which seemed very pathetic, very much at his mercy. He moved quickly towards the chair. "Tired, are you?" "It's my fault, taking you up so high and keeping you out so long. Such a windless day, too." She watched his concern, her pose languid, her eyes raised to him, but as unreadable as ever. He avoided looking into them for that very reason. He forgot himself in the contemplation of those passive arms, of those defenceless lips, and, yes, one had to go back to them, of these wide-open eyes. Something wild in their grey stare made him think of sea-birds in the cold murkiness of high latitudes. He started when she spoke, all the charm of physical intimacy revealed suddenly in that voice. "You should try to love me," she said. He made a movement of astonishment. "Try," he muttered. "But it seems to me—" He broke off, saying to himself that if he loved her he had never told her so in so many words. Simple words, that they died on his lips. "What makes you say that?" he asked. She lowered her eyelids and turned her head a little. "I've done nothing," she said in a low voice. "It's you who've been good, helpful, and tender to me. Perhaps you love me for that, just for that. Or perhaps you love me for company, and because... well, but sometimes it seems to me that you can never love me for myself, only for myself, as people do love each other when it is to be forever." Her head drooped. Forever, she breathed out again. Then, still more faintly, she added an entreaty. Do try. These last words went straight to his heart, the sound of them more than the sense. He did not know what to say, either from want of practice in dealing with women, or simply from his innate honesty of thought. All his defences were broken now. Life had him fairly by the throat. But he managed a smile, though she was not looking at him. Yes, he did manage it, the well-known haste smile of playful courtesy, so familiar to all sorts and conditions of men in the islands. My dear Lena, he said, it looks as if you were trying to pick a very unnecessary quarrel with me, of all people. She made no movement. With his elbows spread out, he was twisting the ends of his long moustaches, very masculine and perplexed, enveloped in the atmosphere of femininity, as in a cloud, suspecting pitfalls, and as if afraid to move. I must admit, though, he added, that there is no one else, and I suppose a certain amount of quarrelling is necessary for existence in this world. That girl, seated in her chair in graceful quietude, was to him like a script in an unknown language, or even more simply mysterious, like any writing to the illiterate. As far as women went, he was altogether uninstructed, and he had not the gift of intuition which is fostered in the days of youth by dreams and visions, exercises of the heart fitting it for the encounters of the world, in which love itself rests as much on antagonism as on attraction. His mental attitude was that of a man looking this way and that on a piece of writing which he is unable to decipher, but which may be big with some revelation. He didn't know what to say. All he found to add was, I don't even understand what I have done or left undone to distress you like this. He stopped, struck afresh by the physical and moral sense of the imperfections of their relations, a sense which made him desire her constant nearness, before his eyes, under his hand, and which, when she was out of his sight, made her so vague, so elusive and illusory, a promise that could not be embraced and held. No, I don't see clearly what you mean. Is your mind turned towards the future? He interpellated her with marked playfulness, because he was ashamed to let such a word pass his lips. But all his cherished negations were falling off him one by one. Because if it is so, there is nothing easier than to dismiss it. In our future, as in what people call the other life, there is nothing to be afraid of. She raised her eyes to him, and if nature had formed them to express anything else but blank candour, he would have learnt how terrified she was by his talk, and the fact that her sinking heart loved him more desperately than ever. He smiled at her. Dismiss all thought of it, he insisted. Surely you don't suspect, after what I have heard from you, that I am anxious to return to mankind? I? Murder my poor Morrison? It's possible that I may really be capable of that which they say I have done. The point is that I haven't done it. But it is an unpleasant subject to me. I ought to be ashamed to confess it, but it is. Let us forget it. There's that in you, Lena, which can console me for worse things, for uglier passages, and if we forget, there are no voices here to remind us. She had raised her head before he paused. Nothing can break in on us here, he went on, and, as if there had been an appeal or a provocation in her upward glance, he bent down and took her under the arms, raising her straight out of the chair into a sudden and close embrace. Her alacrity to respond, which made her seem as light as a feather, warmed his heart at that moment more than closer caresses had done before. He had not expected that ready impulse towards himself which had been dormant in her passive attitude. He had just felt the clasp of her arms round his neck, when, with a slight exclamation, "He's here!" she disengaged herself and bolted away into her room. Chapter 6. Haste was astounded. Looking all round, as if to take the whole room to witness of this outrage, he became aware of Wang materialized in the doorway. The intrusion was as surprising as anything could be, in view of the strict regularity with which Wang made himself visible. Haste was tempted to laugh at first. This practical comment on his affirmation that nothing could break in on them relieved the strain of his feelings. He was a little vexed, too. The Chinaman preserved a profound silence. "What do you want?" asked Haste sternly. "Boat out there," said the Chinaman. "Where? What do you mean? Boat adrift in the straits?" Some subtle change in Wang's bearing suggested his being out of breath, but he did not pant, and his voice was steady. "No, row!" It was Haste now who was startled, and raised his voice. "Malay man, eh?" Wang made a slight negative movement with his head. "Do you hear, Lena?" Haste called out. "Wang says there's a boat in sight. Somewhere near, apparently. Where's that boat, Wang?" "Round the point," said Wang, leaping into Malay unexpectedly, and in a loud voice. "White men 3." "So close as that?" exclaimed Haste, moving out on the veranda, followed by Wang. "White men? Impossible!" Over the clearing the shadows were already lengthening. The sun hung low. A ruddy glare lay on the burnt black patch in front of the bungalow, and slanted on the ground between the straight, tall, mast-like trees, soaring 100 feet or more without a branch. The growth of bushes cut off all the view of the jetty from the veranda. Far away to the right, Wang's hut, or rather its dark roof of mats, could be seen above the bamboo fence which ensured the privacy of the Alfuro woman. The Chinaman looked that way swiftly. Haste paused, and then stepped back a pace into the room. "White men, Lena, apparently. What are you doing?" "I'm just bathing my eyes a little," the girl's voice said from the inner room. "Oh, yes, all right. Do you want me?" "No, you had better. I'm going down to the jetty. Yes, you had better stay in." What an extraordinary thing! It was so extraordinary that nobody could possibly appreciate how extraordinary it was but himself. His mind was full of mere exclamations, while his feet were carrying him in the direction of the jetty. He followed the line of the rails, escorted by Wang. "Where were you when you first saw the boat?" he asked over his shoulder. Wang explained in Malay that he had gone to the shore end of the wharf to get a few lumps of coal from the big heap. When happening to raise his eyes from the ground, he saw the boat. A white man boat, not a canoe. He had good eyes. He had seen the boat, with the men at the oars, and here Wang made a particular gesture over his eyes, as if his vision had received a blow. He had turned at once and run to the house to report. "No mistake, eh?" said Haste, moving on. At the very outer edge of the belt he stopped short. Wang halted behind him on the path till the voice of number 1 called him sharply forward into the open. He obeyed. "Where's that boat?" asked Haste forcibly. "I say, where is it?" Nothing whatever was to be seen between the point and the jetty. The stretch of Diamond Bay was like a piece of purple shadow, lustrous and empty, while beyond the land the open sea lay blue and opaque under the sun. Haste's eyes swept all over the offing till they met, far off, the dark cone of the volcano, with its faint plume of smoke broadening and vanishing everlastingly at the top, without altering its shape in the glowing transparency of the evening. "The fellow has been dreaming," he muttered to himself. He looked hard at the Chinaman. Wang seemed turned into stone. Suddenly, as if he had received a shock, he started, flung his arm out with a pointing forefinger, and made guttural noises to the effect that there, he had seen a boat. It was very uncanny. Haste thought of some strange hallucination. Unlikely enough, but that a boat with 3 men in it should have sunk between the point and the jetty, suddenly, like a stone, without leaving so much on the surface as a floating oar, was still more unlikely. The theory of a phantom boat would have been more credible than that. "Confound it," he muttered to himself. He was unpleasantly affected by this mystery, but now a simple explanation occurred to him. He stepped hastily out on the wharf. The boat, if it had existed and had retreated, could perhaps be seen from the far end of the long jetty. Nothing was to be seen. Haste let his eyes roam idly over the sea. He was so absorbed in his perplexity that a hollow sound, as of somebody tumbling about in a boat, with a clatter of oars and spars, failed to make him move for a moment. When his mind seized its meaning, he had no difficulty in locating the sound. It had come from below, under the jetty. He ran back for a dozen yards or so, and then looked over. His sight plunged straight into the stern sheets of a big boat, the greater part of which was hidden from him by the planking of the jetty. His eyes fell on the thin back of a man doubled up over the tiller in a queer, uncomfortable attitude of drooping sorrow. Another man, more directly below Haste, sprawled on his back from gunwale to gunwale, half off the after thwart, his head lower than his feet. This second man glared wildly upward and struggled to raise himself, but to all appearance was much too drunk to succeed. The visible part of the boat contained also a flat leather trunk on which the first man's long legs were tucked up nervously. A large earthenware jug, with its wide mouth uncorked, rolled out on the bottom boards from under the sprawling man. Haste had never been so much astonished in his life. He stared dumbly at the strange boat's crew. From the first he was positive that these men were not sailors. They wore the white drill suit of tropical civilization, but their apparition in a boat Haste could not connect with anything plausible. The civilization of the tropics could have had nothing to do with it. It was more like those myths current in Polynesia of amazing strangers who arrive at an island, gods or demons, bringing good or evil to the innocence of the inhabitants, gifts of unknown things, words never heard before. Haste noticed a cork helmet floating alongside the boat, evidently fallen from the head of the man doubled over the tiller, who displayed a dark, bony pole. An oar, too, had been knocked overboard, probably by the sprawling man, who was still struggling between the thwarts. By this time Haste regarded the visitation no longer with surprise, but with the sustained attention demanded by a difficult problem. With one foot poised on the string-piece, and leaning on his raised knee, he was taking in everything. The sprawling man rolled off the thwart, collapsed, and most unexpectedly got on his feet. He swayed dizzily, spreading his arms out, and uttered faintly a hoarse, dreamy, "Hello." His upturned face was swollen, red, peeling all over the nose and cheeks. His stare was irrational. Haste perceived stains of dried blood all over the front of his dirty white coat, and also on one sleeve. "What's the matter? Are you wounded?" The other glanced down, reeled. One of his feet was inside a large pith hat, and recovering himself, let out a dismal, grating sound in the manner of a grim laugh. "Blood, not mine. Thirst's the matter. Exhausted's the matter. Done up. Drink, man! Give us water!" Thirst was in the very tone of his words, alternating a broken croak and a faint, throaty rustle which just reached Haste's ears. The man in the boat raised his hands to be helped up onto the jetty, whispering, "I tried. I'm too weak. I tumbled down." Wang was coming along the jetty slowly, with intent, straining eyes. "Run back and bring a crowbar here. There's one lying by the coal heap," Haste shouted to him. The man standing in the boat sat down on the thwart behind him. A horrible coughing laugh came through his swollen lips. "Crowbar? What's that for?" he mumbled, and his head dropped on his chest mournfully. Meantime, Haste, as if he had forgotten the boat, started kicking hard at a large brass tap projecting above the planks. To accommodate ships that came for coal and happened to need water as well, a stream had been tapped in the interior and an iron pipe led along the jetty. It terminated with a curved end almost exactly where the stranger's boat had been driven, between the piles, but the tap was set fast. "Hurry up!" Haste yelled to the Chinaman, who was running with the crowbar in his hand. Haste snatched it from him, and obtaining a leverage against the string-piece, wrung the stiff tap round with a mighty jerk. "I hope that pipe hasn't got choked," he muttered to himself anxiously. It hadn't, but it did not yield a strong gush. The sound of a thin stream, partly breaking on the gunwale of the boat and partly splashing alongside, became at once audible. It was greeted by a cry of inarticulate and savage joy. Haste knelt on the string-piece and peered down. The man who had spoken was already holding his open mouth under the bright trickle. Water ran over his eyelids and over his nose, gurgled down his throat, flowed over his chin. Then some obstruction in the pipe gave way, and a sudden thick jet broke on his face. In a moment his shoulders were soaked, the front of his coat inundated. He streamed and dripped. Water ran into his pockets, down his legs, into his shoes, but he had clutched the end of the pipe, and hanging on with both hands, swallowed, spluttered, choked, snorted with the noises of a swimmer. Suddenly a curious dull roar reached Haste's ears. Something hairy and black flew from under the jetty. A dishevelled head, coming on like a cannonball, took the man at the pipe in the flank, with enough force to tear his grip loose and fling him headlong into the stern sheets. He fell upon the folded legs of the man at the tiller, who, roused by the commotion in the boat, was sitting up, silent, rigid, and very much like a corpse. His eyes were but two black patches, and his teeth glistened with a death's head grin between his retracted lips, no thicker than blackish parchment glued over the gums. From him, Haste's eyes wandered to the creature who had replaced the first man at the end of the water pipe. Enormous brown paws clutched it savagely, the wild big head hung back, and in a face covered with a wet mass of hair there gaped crookedly a wide mouth full of fangs. The water filled it, welled up in hoarse coughs, ran down on each side of the jaws and down the hairy throat, soaked the black pelt of the enormous chest, naked under a torn check shirt, heaving convulsively with a play of massive muscles carved in red mahogany. As soon as the first man had recovered the breath knocked out of him by the irresistible charge, a scream of mad cursing issued from the stern sheets. With a rigid, angular crooking of the elbow, the man at the tiller put his hand back to his hip. "Don't shoot him, sir," yelled the first man. "Wait, let me have that tiller. I'll teach him to shove himself in front of a cavallero." Martin Ricardo flourished the heavy piece of wood, leaped forward with astonishing vigour, and brought it down in Pedro's head with a crash that resounded all over the quiet sweep of Black Diamond Bay. A crimson patch appeared on the matted hair, red veins appeared in the water flowing all over his face, and it dripped in rosy drops off his head. But the man hung on. Not till a second furious blow descended did the hairy paws let go their grip, and the squirming body sink limply. Before it could touch the bottom boards, a tremendous kick in the ribs from Ricardo's foot shifted it forward out of sight, whence came the noise of a heavy thud, a clatter of spars, and a pitiful grunt. Ricardo stooped to look under the jetty. "Ah, dog! This'll teach you to keep back where you belong, you murdering brute, you slaughtering savage, you! You infidel, you robber of churches! Next time I'll rip you open from neck to heel, you carrion eater! Esclavo!" He backed a little and straightened himself up. "I don't mean it really," he remarked to Haste, whose steady eyes met him from above. He ran aft briskly. "Come along, sir. It's your turn. I oughtn't to have drunk first. It's truth, I forgot myself. A gentleman like you will overlook that, I know." As he made these apologies, Ricardo extended his hand. "Let me steady you, sir." Slowly Mr. Jones unfolded himself in all his slenderness, rocked, staggered, and caught Ricardo's shoulder. His henchman assisted him to the pipe, which went on gushing a clear stream of water, sparkling exceedingly against the black piles and the gloom under the jetty. "Catch hold, sir," Ricardo advised solicitously. "All right?" He stepped back, and while Mr. Jones revelled in the abundance of water, he addressed himself to Haste with a sort of justificatory speech, the tone of which, reflecting his feelings, partook of purring and spitting. They had been 30 hours tugging at the oars, he explained, and they had been more than 40 hours without water, except that the night before they had licked the dew off the gunwales. Ricardo did not explain to Haste how it happened. At that precise moment he had no explanation ready for the man on the wharf, who, he guessed, must be wondering much more at the presence of his visitors than at their plight. Chapter 7. The explanation lay in the two simple facts that the light winds and strong currents of the Java Sea had drifted the boat about until they partly lost their bearings, and that by some extraordinary mistake one of the two jars put into the boat by Schomburg's man contained salt water. Ricardo tried to put some pathos into his tones. Pulling for 30 hours with 18-foot oars, and the sun! Ricardo relieved his feelings by cursing the sun. They had felt their hearts and lungs shrivel within them. And then, as if all that hadn't been trouble enough already, he complained bitterly, he had had to waste his fainting strength in beating their servants about the head with a stretcher. The fool had wanted to drink sea-water and wouldn't listen to reason. There was no stopping him otherwise. It was better to beat him into insensibility than to have him go crazy in the boat and to be obliged to shoot him. The preventive, administered with enough force to brain an elephant, boasted Ricardo, had to be applied on 2 occasions, the second time all but in sight of the jetty. "You've seen the beauty," Ricardo went on expansively, hiding his lack of some sort of probable story under the loquacity. "I had to hammer him away from the spout. I happened to fresh all the old broken spots on his head. You saw how hard I had to it. He has no restraint at all. If it wasn't that he can be made useful in one way or another, I would just as soon have let the governor shoot him." He smiled up at Haste in his peculiar lip-retracting manner, and added, by way of afterthought, "That's what will happen to him in the end if he doesn't learn to restrain himself. But I've taught him to mind his manners for a while, anyhow." And again he addressed his quick grin up to the man on the wharf. His round eyes had never left Haste's face ever since he began to deliver his account of the voyage. "So that's how he looks," Ricardo was saying to himself. He had not expected Haste to be like this. He had formed for himself a conception containing the helpful suggestion of a vulnerable point. These solitary men were often tipplers, but no, this was not a drinking man's face, nor could he detect the weakness of alarm or even the weakness of surprise on these features, in those steady eyes. "We were too far gone to climb out," Ricardo went on. "I heard you walking along, though. I thought I shouted. I tried to. You didn't hear me shout?" Haste made an almost imperceptible negative sign, which the greedy eyes of Ricardo, greedy for all signs, did not miss. "Throat too parched. We didn't even care to whisper to each other lately. Thirst chokes one. We might have died there under this wharf before you found us." "I couldn't think where you had gone to," Haste was heard at last, addressing directly the newcomers from the sea. "You were seen as soon as you cleared that point." "We were seen, eh?" grunted Mr. Ricardo. "We pulled like machines, daren't stop. The governor sat at the tiller, but he couldn't speak to us. She drove in between the piles till she hit something, and we all tumbled off the thwarts as if we'd been drunk. Drunk! Ha ha! Too dry, by George! We fetched in here with the very last of our strength, and no mistake. Another mile would have done for us. When I heard your footsteps above, I tried to get up and now fell down." "That was the first sound I heard," said Haste. Mr. Jones, the front of his soiled white tunic soaked and plastered against his breastbone, staggered away from the water pipe. Steadying himself on Ricardo's shoulder, he drew a long breath, raised his dripping head, and produced a smile of ghastly amiability, which was lost upon the thoughtful Haste. Behind his back, the sun, touching the water, was like a disk of iron cooled to a dull red glow, ready to start rolling round the circular steel plate of the sea, which, under the darkening sky, looked more solid than the high ridge of Samburan, more solid than the point whose long outlined slope melted into its own unfathomable shadow, blurring the dim sheen on the bay. The forceful stream from the pipe broke like shattered glass on the boat's gunwale. Its loud, fitful, and persistent splashing revealed the depths of the world's silence. "Great notion to lead the water out here," pronounced Ricardo appreciatively. Water was life. He felt now as if he could run a mile, scale a 10-foot wall, sing a song. Only a few moments ago he was next door to a corpse, done up, unable to stand, to lift a hand, unable to groan. A drop of water had done that miracle. "Don't you feel life itself running and soaking into you, sir?" he asked his principal, with deferential but forced vivacity. Without a word, Mr. Jones stepped off the thwart and sat down in the stern sheets. "Isn't that man of yours bleeding to death in the bows under there?" inquired Haste. Ricardo ceased his ecstasies over the life-giving water, and answered in a tone of innocence, "He? You may call him a man, but his hide is a jolly sight tougher than the toughest alligator he ever skinned in the good old days. You don't know how much he can stand. I do. We tried him a long time ago. Hola! Hola there, Pedro! Pedro!" he yelled, with a force of lung, testifying to the regenerative virtues of water. A weak "Senor?" came from under the wharf. "What did I tell you?" said Ricardo triumphantly. "Nothing can hurt him. He's all right. But I say, the boat's getting swamped. Can't you turn this water off before you sink her under us? She's half full already." At a sign from Haste, Wang hammered at the brass tap on the wharf, then stood behind number 1, crowbar in hand, motionless as before. Ricardo was perhaps not so certain of Pedro's toughness as he affirmed, for he stooped, peering under the wharf, then moved forward out of sight. The gush of water ceasing suddenly made a silence which became complete when the after-trickle stopped. Afar, the sun was reduced to a red spark, glowing very low in the breathless intensity of twilight. Purple gleams lingered on the water all round the boat. The spectral figure in the stern sheets spoke in a languid tone. "That, companion, secretary of mine is a queer chap. I'm afraid we aren't presenting ourselves in a very favourable light." Haste listened. It was the conventional voice of an educated man, only strangely lifeless. But more strange yet was this concern for appearances, expressed he did not know whether in jest or in earnest. Earnestness was hardly to be supposed under the circumstances, and no one had ever jested in such dead tones. It was something which could not be answered, and Haste said nothing. The other went on, "Travelling as I do, I find a man of his sort extremely useful. He has his little weaknesses, no doubt." "Indeed," Haste was provoked into speaking, "weakness of the arm is not one of them, neither is an exaggerated humanity, as far as I can judge." "Defects of temper," explained Mr. Jones from the stern sheets. The subject of this dialogue, coming out just then from under the wharf into the visible part of the boat, made himself heard in his own defence, in a voice full of life, and with nothing languid in his manner. On the contrary, it was brisk, almost jocose. He begged pardon for contradicting. He was never out of temper with our Pedro. The fellow was a Dago of immense strength and of no sense whatsoever. This combination made him dangerous, and he had to be treated accordingly, in a manner which he could understand. Reasoning was beyond him. "And so," Ricardo addressed Haste with animation, "you mustn't be surprised if—" "I assure you," Haste interrupted, "that my wonder at your arrival in your boat here is so great that it leaves no room for minor astonishments. But hadn't you better land?" "That's a talk, sir." Ricardo began to bustle about the boat, talking all the time. Finding himself unable to size up this man, he was inclined to credit him with extraordinary powers of penetration, which, it seemed to him, would be favoured by silence. Also, he feared some point-blank question. He had no ready-made story to tell. He and his patron had put off considering that rather important detail too long. For the last 2 days, the horrors of thirst, coming on them unexpectedly, had prevented consultation. They had had to pull for dear life. But the man on the wharf, were he in league with the devil himself, would pay for all their sufferings, thought Ricardo with an unholy joy. Meantime, splashing in the water which covered the bottom boards, Ricardo congratulated himself aloud on the luggage being out of the way of the wet. He had piled it up forward. He had roughly tied up Pedro's head. Pedro had nothing to grumble about. On the contrary, he ought to be mighty thankful to him, Ricardo, for being alive at all. "Well, now, let me give you a leg up, sir," he said cheerily to his motionless principal in the stern sheets. "All our troubles are over, for a time anyhow. Ain't it luck to find a white man on this island? I would just as soon expected to make an angel from heaven, eh, Mr. Jones? Now then, ready, sir? 1, 2, 3, up you go." Helped from below by Ricardo, and from above by the man more unexpected than an angel, Mr. Jones scrambled up and stood on the wharf by the side of Haste. He swayed like a reed. The night descending on Samburan turned into dense shadow the point of land and the wharf itself, and gave a dark solidity to the unshimmering water extending to the last faint trace of light away to the west. Haste stared at the guests whom the renounced world had sent him thus at the end of the day. The only other vestige of light left on earth lurked in the hollows of the thin man's eyes. They gleamed, mobile and languidly evasive. The eyelids fluttered. "You are feeling weak," said Haste. "For the moment, a little," confessed the other. With loud panting, Ricardo scrambled on his hands and knees upon the wharf, energetic and unaided. He rose up at Haste's elbow and stamped his foot on the planks with a sharp, provocative double beat, such as is heard sometimes in fencing schools before the adversaries engage their foils. Not that the renegade seaman Ricardo knew anything of fencing. What he called shooting irons were his weapons, or the still less aristocratic knife, such as was even then ingeniously strapped to his leg. He thought of it at that moment. A swift stooping moment, then, on the recovery, a ripping blow, a shove off the wharf, and no noise except a splash in the water that would scarcely disturb the silence. Haste would have no time for a cry. It would be quick and neat, and immensely in accord with Ricardo's humour. But he repressed this gust of savagery. The job was not such a simple one. This piece had to be played to another tune, and in much slower time. He returned to his note of talkative simplicity. "Aye, and I don't feel as strong as I thought I was when the first drink set me up. Great wonder work of water is, and to get it right here on the spot, it was heaven, eh, sir?" Mr. Jones, being directly addressed, took up his part in the concerted piece. "Really, when I saw a wharf on what might have been an uninhabited island, I couldn't believe my eyes. I doubted its existence. I thought it was a delusion, till the boat actually drove between the piles, as you see her lying now." While he was speaking faintly, in a voice which did not seem to belong to the earth, his henchman, in extremely loud and terrestrial accents, was fussing about their belongings in the boat, addressing himself to Pedro. "Come now, pass up the dunnage there. Move yourself, hombre. I'll have to get down again and give you a tap on those bandages of yours, you growling bear, you." "Ah, you didn't believe in the reality of the wharf," Haste was saying to Mr. Jones. "You ought to kiss my hands." Ricardo caught hold of an ancient Gladstone bag and swung it on the wharf with a thump. "Yes, you ought to burn a candle before me, as they do before the saints in your country. No saint has ever done so much for you as I have, you ungrateful vagabond. Now then, up you get." Helped by the talkative Ricardo, Pedro scrambled up on the wharf, where he remained for some time on all fours, swinging to and fro his shaggy head tied up in white rags. Then he got up clumsily, like a bulky animal in the dusk, balancing itself on its hind legs. Mr. Jones began to explain languidly to Haste that they were in a pretty bad state that morning when they caught sight of the smoke of the volcano. It nerved them to make an effort for their lives. Soon afterwards they made out the island. "I had just wits enough left in my baked brains to alter the direction of the boat," the ghostly voice went on. "As to finding assistance, a wharf, a white man, nobody would have dreamt of it. Simply preposterous. That's what I thought when my Chinaman came and told me he had seen a boat with white men pulling up," said Haste. "Most extraordinary luck," interjected Ricardo, standing by, anxiously attentive to every word. "Seems a dream," he added. "A lovely dream." A silence fell on that group of three, as if every one had become afraid to speak, in an obscure sense of an impending crisis. Pedro on one side of them and Wang on the other had the air of watchful spectators. A few stars had come out pursuing the ebbing twilight. A light draught of air, tepid enough in the thickening twilight after the scorching day, struck a chill into Mr. Jones in his soaked clothes. "I may infer, then, that there is a settlement of white people here," he murmured, shivering visibly. Haste roused himself. "Oh, abandoned. I'm alone here, practically alone, but several empty houses are still standing. No lack of accommodation. We may just as well... Here, Wang, go back to the shore and run the trolley out here." The last words having been spoken in Malay, he explained courteously that he had given directions for the transport of the luggage. Wang had melted into the night in his soundless manner. "My word, rails laid down and all!" exclaimed Ricardo softly, in a tone of admiration. "Well, I never!" "We were working a coal mine here," said the late manager of the Tropical Belt Coal Company. "These are only the ghosts of things that have been." Mr. Jones's teeth were suddenly started chattering by another faint puff of wind, a mere sigh from the west, where Venus cast her rays on the dark edge of the horizon, like a bright lamp hung above the grave of the sun. "We might be moving on," proposed Haste. "My Chinaman and that ungrateful servant of yours with the broken head can load the things and come after us." The suggestion was accepted without words. Moving towards the shore, the three men met the trolley, a mere metallic rustle which whisked past them, the shadowy Wang running noiselessly behind. Only the sound of their footsteps accompanied them. It was a long time since so many footsteps had rung together on that jetty. Before they stepped onto the path trodden through the grass, Haste said, "I'm prevented from offering you a share of my own quarters." The distinct courtliness of this beginning arrested the other two suddenly, as if amazed by some manifest incongruity. "I should regret it more," he went on, "if I were not in a position to give you more the choice of those empty bungalows for a temporary home." He turned round and plunged into the narrow track, the two others following in single file. "Queer start," Ricardo took the opportunity for whispering as he fell behind Mr. Jones, who swayed in the gloom, enclosed by the stalks of tropical grass, almost as slender as a stalk of grass himself. In this order they emerged into the open space kept clear of vegetation by Wang's judicious system of periodic firing. The shapes of buildings, unlighted, high-roofed, looked mysteriously extensive and featureless against the increasing glitter of the stars. Haste was pleased at the absence of light in his bungalow. It looked as uninhabited as the others. He continued to lead the way, inclining to the right. His equable voice was heard. "This one would be the best. It was our counting-house. There is some furniture in it yet. I am pretty certain that you'll find a couple of camp bedsteads in one of the rooms." The high-pitched roof of the bungalow towered up very close, eclipsing the sky. "Here we are. 3 steps. As you see, there's a wide veranda. Sorry to keep you waiting for a moment. The door is locked, I think." He was heard trying it. Then he leaned across the rail, saying, "Wang will get the keys." The others waited, two vague shapes nearly mingled together in the darkness of the veranda, from which issued a sudden chattering of Mr. Jones's teeth, directly suppressed, and a slight shuffle of Ricardo's feet. Their guide and host, his back against the rail, seemed to have forgotten their existence. Suddenly he moved and murmured, "Ah, here's the trolley." Then he raised his voice in Malay and was answered, "Ya Tuan," from an indistinct group that could be made out in the direction of the track. "I have sent Wang for the key and a light," he said, in a voice that came out without any particular direction, a peculiarity which disconcerted Ricardo. Wang did not tarry long on his mission. Very soon from the distant recesses of obscurity appeared the swinging lantern he carried. It cast a fugitive ray on the arrested trolley with the uncouth figure of the wild Pedro drooping over the load. Then it moved towards the bungalow and ascended the stairs. After working at the stiff lock, Wang applied his shoulder to the door. It came open with explosive suddenness, as if in a passion at being thus disturbed after 2 years' repose. From the dark slope of a tall stand-up writing desk, a forgotten solitary sheet of paper flew up and settled gracefully on the floor. Wang and Pedro came and went through the offended door, bringing the things off the trolley, one flitting swiftly in and out, the other staggering heavily. Later, directed by a few quiet words from number 1, Wang made several journeys with the lantern to the storerooms, bringing in blankets, provisions in tins, coffee, sugar, and a packet of candles. He lighted one and stuck it on the ledge of the stand-up desk. Meanwhile, Pedro, being introduced to some kindling wood and a bundle of dry sticks, had busied himself outside in lighting a fire, on which he placed a ready-filled kettle handed to him by Wang impassively, at arm's length, as if across a chasm. Having received the thanks of his guests, Haste wished them good night and withdrew, leaving them to their repose. Chapter 8. Haste walked away slowly. There was still no light in his bungalow, and he thought that perhaps it was just as well. By this time he was much less perturbed. Wang had preceded him with the lantern, as if in a hurry to get away from the 2 white men and their hairy attendant. The light was not dancing along any more. It was standing perfectly still by the steps of the veranda. Haste, glancing back casually, saw behind him still another light, the light of the stranger's open fire. A black, uncouth form, stooping over it monstrously, staggered away into the outlying shadows. The kettle had boiled, probably. With that weird vision of something questionably human impressed upon his senses, Haste moved on a pace or 2. What could the people be who had such a creature for their familiar attendant? He stopped. The vague apprehension of a distant future in which he saw Lena unavoidably separated from him by profound and subtle differences, the sceptical carelessness which had accompanied every one of his attempts at action, like a secret reserve of his soul, fell away from him. He no longer belonged to himself. There was a call far more imperious and august. He came up to the bungalow, and at the very limit of the lantern's light on the top step he saw her feet and the bottom part of her dress. The rest of her person was suggested dimly as high as her waist. She sat on a chair, and the gloom of the low eaves descended upon her head and shoulders. She didn't stir. "You haven't gone to sleep here?" he asked. "Oh, no. I was waiting for you. In the dark." Haste, on the top step, leaned across a wooden pillar after moving the lantern to one side. "I have been thinking that it is just as well you had no light. But wasn't it dull for you to sit in the dark?" "I don't need a light to think of you." Her charming voice gave a value to this banal answer, which had also the merit of truth. Haste laughed a little, and said that he had a curious experience. She made no remark. He tried to figure to himself the outlines of her easy pose. A spot of dim light here and there hinted at the unfailing grace of attitude, which was one of her natural possessions. She had thought of him, but not in connection with the strangers. She had admired him from the first. She had been attracted by his warm voice, his gentle eye, but she had felt him too wonderfully difficult to know. He had given to life a savour, a movement, a promise mingled with menaces, which she had not suspected were to be found in it, or at any rate not by a girl wedded to misery, as she was. She said to herself that she must not be irritated because he seemed too self-contained, and as if shut up in a world of his own. When he took her in his arms, she felt that his embrace had a great and compelling force, that he was moved deeply, and that perhaps he would not get tired of her so very soon. She thought that he had opened to her the feelings of delicate joy, that the very uneasiness he caused her was delicious in its sadness, and that she would try to hold him as long as she could, till her fainting arms, her sinking soul could cling to him no more. "Wang's not here, of course," Haste said suddenly. She answered as if in her sleep. "He put the light down here without stopping and ran." "Ran, did he? Well, it's considerably later than his usual time to go home to his Alfuro wife, but to be seen running is a sort of degradation for Wang, who has mastered the art of vanishing. Do you think he was startled out of his perfection by something?" "Why should he be startled?" Her voice remained dreamy, a little uncertain. "I have been startled," Haste said. She was not listening to him. The lantern at their feet threw the shadows of her face upward. Her eyes glistened, as if frightened and attentive, above a lighted chin and a very white throat. "Upon my word," mused Haste, "now that I don't see them, I can hardly believe those fellows exist." "And what about me?" she asked, so swiftly that he made a movement like somebody pounced upon from an ambush. "When you don't see me, do you believe that I exist?" "Exist? Most charmingly. My dear Lena, you don't know your own advantages. Why, your voice alone would be enough to make you unforgettable." "Oh, I didn't mean forgetting in that way. I dare say if I were to die you would remember me right enough. But what good will that be to anybody? It's while I'm alive that I want." Haste stood by her chair, a stalwart figure imperfectly lighted. The broad shoulders, the martial face that was like a disguise of his disarmed soul, were lost in the gloom above the plane of light in which his feet were planted. He suffered from a trouble with which she had nothing to do. She had no general conception of the conditions of the existence he had offered to her. Drawn into its peculiar stagnation, she remained unrelated to it because of her ignorance. For instance, she could never perceive the prodigious improbability of the arrival of that boat. She did not seem to be thinking of it. Perhaps she had already forgotten the fact herself. And Haste resolved suddenly to say nothing more of it. It was not that he shrank from alarming her. Not feeling anything definite himself, he could not imagine a precise effect being produced on her by any amount of explanation. There is a quality in events which is apprehended differently by different minds, or even by the same mind at different times. Any man living at all consciously knows that embarrassing truth. Haste was aware that this visit could bode nothing pleasant. In his present soured temper towards all mankind, he looked upon it as a visitation of a particularly offensive kind. He glanced along the veranda in the direction of the other bungalow. The fire of sticks in front of it had gone out. No faint glow of embers, not the slightest thread of light in that direction, hinted at the presence of strangers. The darker shapes in the obscurity, the dead silence, betrayed nothing of that strange intrusion. The peace of Samburan asserted itself as on any other night. Everything was as before, except, Haste became aware of it suddenly, that for a whole minute, perhaps, with his hand on the back of the girl's chair and within a foot of her person, he had lost the sense of her existence for the first time since he had brought her over to share this invincible, this undefiled peace. He picked up the lantern, and the act made a silent stir all along the veranda. A spoke of shadow swung swiftly across her face, and the strong light rested on the immobility of her features, as of a woman looking at a vision. Her eyes were still, her lips serious. Her dress, open at the neck, stirred slightly to her even breathing. "We had better go in, Lena," suggested Haste, very low, as if breaking a spell cautiously. She rose without a word. Haste followed her indoors. As they passed through the living room, he left the lantern burning on the centre table. Chapter 9. That night the girl woke up, for the first time in her new experience, with the sensation of having been abandoned to her own devices. She woke up from a painful dream of separation brought about in a way which she could not understand, and missed the relief of the waking instant. The desolate feeling of being alone persisted. She was really alone. A night-light made it plain enough in the dim, mysterious manner of a dream, but this was reality. It startled her exceedingly. In a moment she was at the curtain that hung in the doorway, and raised it with a steady hand. The conditions of their life in Samburan would have made peeping absurd, nor was such a thing in her character. This was not a movement of curiosity, but of downright alarm, the continued distress and fear of the dream. The night could have not been very far advanced. The light of the lantern was burning strongly, striping the floor and walls of the room with thick black bands. She hardly knew whether she expected to see Haste or not, but she saw him at once, standing by the table in his sleeping suit, his back to the doorway. She stepped in noiselessly with her bare feet, and let the curtain fall behind her. Something characteristic in Haste's attitude made her say, almost in a whisper, "You're looking for something." He could not have heard her before, but he didn't start at the unexpected whisper. He only pushed the drawer of the table in, and without even looking over his shoulder, asked quietly, accepting her presence as if he had been aware of all her movements, "I say, are you certain that Wang didn't go through this room this evening?" "Wang? When?" "After leaving the lantern, I mean." "Oh, no, he ran on. I watched him." "Or before, perhaps, while I was with these boat people? Do you know? Can you tell?" "I hardly think so. I came out as the sun went down, and sat outside till you came back to me." "He could have popped in for an instant through the back veranda." "I heard nothing in here," she said. "What's the matter?" "Naturally you wouldn't hear. He can be as quiet as a shadow when he likes. I believe he could steal the pillows from under our heads. He might have been here 10 minutes ago." "What woke you up? Was it a noise?" "I can't say that. Generally one can't tell, but it is likely, Lena. You are, I believe, the lighter sleeper of us two. A noise loud enough to wake me up would have awakened you too. I tried to be as quiet as I could. What roused you?" "I don't know. A dream, perhaps. I woke up crying." "What was the dream?" Haste, with one hand resting on the table, had turned in her direction, his round, uncovered head set on a fighter's muscular neck. She left his question unanswered, as if she had not heard it. "What is it that you've missed?" she asked in her turn, very grave. Her dark hair, drawn smoothly back, was done in 2 thick tresses for the night. Haste noticed the good form of her brow, the dignity of its width, its unshining whiteness. It was a sculptural forehead. He had a moment of acute appreciation intruding upon another order of thoughts. It was as if there could be no end of his discoveries about that girl at the most incongruous moments. She had on nothing but a hand-woven cotton sarong, one of Hast's few purchases years ago in Celebes, where they are made. He had forgotten all about it till she came, and then she found it at the bottom of an old sandalwood trunk dating back to pre-Morrison days. She had quickly learnt to wind it up under her armpits with a safe twist, as Malay village girls do when they go down to bathe in a river. Her shoulders and arms were bare. One of her tresses, hanging forward, looked almost black against the white skin. As she was taller than the average Malay woman, the sarong ended a good way above her ankles. She stood poised firmly, halfway between the table and the curtained doorway, the insteps of her bare feet gleaming like marble on the overshadowed matting of the floor. The fall of her lighted shoulders, the strong and fine modelling of her arms hanging down her sides, her immobility, too, had something statuesque, the charm of art tense with life. She was not very big. Haste used to think of her first as that poor little girl, but revealed free from the shabby banality of a white platform dress, in the simple drapery of the sarong, there was that in her form and in the proportions of her body which suggested a reduction from a heroic size. She moved forward a step. "What is it that you've missed?" she asked again. Haste turned his back altogether on the table. The black spokes of darkness over the floor and the walls, joining up on the ceiling in a path of shadow, were like the bars of a cage about them. It was his turn to ignore a question. "You woke up in a fright, you say?" he said. She walked up to him, exotic yet familiar, with her white woman's face and shoulders above the Malay sarong, as if it were an airy disguise, but her expression was serious. "No," she replied. "It was distress, rather. You see, you weren't there, and I couldn't tell why you'd gone away from me. A nasty dream. The first I've had, too, since—" "You don't believe in dreams, do you?" asked Haste. "I once knew a woman who did. Leastwise, she used to tell people what dreams mean, for a shilling. Would you go now and ask her what this dream means?" inquired Haste jocularly. "She lived in Camberwell. She was a nasty old thing." Haste laughed a little uneasily. "Dreams are madness, my dear. It's things that happen in the waking world, while one is asleep, that one would be glad to know the meaning of." "You missed something out of this drawer," she said positively. "This or some other. I have looked into every single one of them and come back to this again, as people do. It's difficult to believe the evidence of my own senses, but it isn't there. Now, Lena, are you sure that you didn't—" "I've touched nothing in the house but what you've given me." "Lena!" he cried. He was painfully affected by this disclaimer of a charge which he had not made. It was what a servant might have said, an inferior open to suspicion, or at any rate a stranger. He was angry at being so wretchedly misunderstood, disenchanted at her not being instinctively aware of the place he had secretly given her in his thoughts. "After all," he said to himself, "we are strangers to each other." And then he felt sorry for her. He spoke calmly. "I was about to say, are you sure you have no reason to think that the Chinaman has been in this room tonight?" "You suspect him?" she asked, knitting her eyebrows. "There is no one else to suspect. You may call it a certitude." "You don't want to tell me what it is?" she inquired, in the equable tone in which one takes a fact into account. Haste only smiled faintly. "Nothing very precious as far as value goes," he replied. "I thought it might have been money," she said. "Money!" exclaimed Haste, as if the suggestion had altogether been preposterous. She was so visibly surprised that he hastened to add, "Of course there is some money in the house. There, in that writing desk, the drawer on the left. It's not locked. You can pull it right out. There is a recess, and the board at the back pivots. A very simple hiding place when you know the way to it. I discovered it by accident, and I keep our store of sovereigns in there. The treasure, my dear, is not big enough to require a cavern." He paused, laughed very low, and returned her steady stare. "The loose silver, some guilders and dollars, I have always kept in that unlocked left drawer. I have no doubt Wang knows what there is in it, but he isn't a thief, and that's why No, Lena, what I've missed is not gold or jewels, and that's what makes the fact interesting, which the theft of money cannot be." She took a long breath, relieved to hear that it was not money. A great curiosity was depicted on her face, but she refrained from pressing him with questions. She only gave him one of her deep gleaming smiles. "It isn't me, so it must be Wang. You ought to make him give it back to you." Haste said nothing to that naive and practical suggestion, for the object that he missed from the drawer was his revolver. It was a heavy weapon which he had owned for many years and had never used in his life. Ever since the London furniture had arrived in Samburan, it had been reposing in the drawer of the table. The real dangers of life, for him, were not those which could be repelled by swords or bullets. On the other hand, neither his manner nor his appearance looked sufficiently inoffensive to expose him to light-minded aggression. He could not have explained what had induced him to go to the drawer in the middle of the night. He had started up suddenly, which was very unusual with him. He had found himself sitting up and extremely wide awake all at once, with the girl reposing by his side, lying with her face away from him, a vague, characteristically feminine form in the dim light. She was perfectly still. At that season of the year there were no mosquitoes in Samburan, and the sides of the mosquito net were looped up. Haste swung his feet to the floor and found himself standing there, almost before he had become aware of his intention to get up. Why he did this he did not know. He didn't wish to wake her up, and the slight creak of the broad bedstead had sounded very loud to him. He turned round apprehensively and waited for her to move, but she did not stir. While he looked at her, he had a vision of himself lying there too, also fast asleep, and, it occurred to him for the first time in his life, very defenceless. This quite novel impression of the dangers of slumber made him think suddenly of his revolver. He left the bedroom with noiseless footsteps. The lightness of the curtain he had to lift as he passed out, and the outer door, wide open on the blackness of the veranda, for the roof eaves came down low, shutting out the starlight, gave him a sense of having been dangerously exposed, he could not have said to what. He pulled the drawer open. Its emptiness cut his train of self-communion short. He murmured to the assertive fact, "Impossible. Somewhere else." He tried to remember where he had put the thing, but those provoked whispers of memory were not encouraging. Foraging in every receptacle and nook big enough to contain a revolver, he came slowly to the conclusion that it was not in that room. Neither was it in the other. The whole bungalow consisted of the 2 rooms, and a profuse allowance of veranda all around. Haste stepped out onto the veranda. "It's Wang, beyond a doubt," he thought, staring into the night. "He has got hold of it for some reason." There was nothing to prevent that ghostly Chinaman from materializing suddenly at the foot of the stairs, or anywhere, at any moment, and toppling him over with a dead-sure shot. The danger was so irremediable that it was not worth worrying about, any more than the general precariousness of human life. Haste speculated on this added risk. How long had he been at the mercy of a slender yellow finger on the trigger? That is, if that was the fellow's reason for purloining the revolver. Shoot and inherit, thought Haste. Very simple. Yet there was in his mind a marked reluctance to regard the domesticated grower of vegetables in the light of a murderer. No, it wasn't that, for Wang could have done it any time this last 12 months or more. Haste's mind had worked on the assumption that Wang had possessed himself of the revolver during his own absence from Samburan, but at that period of his speculation his point of view changed. It struck him with the force of manifest certitude that the revolver had been taken only late in the day, or on that very night. Wang, of course. But why? So there had been no danger in the past. It was all ahead. He has me at his mercy now, thought Haste, without particular excitement. The sentiment he experienced was curiosity. He forgot himself in it. It was as if he were considering somebody else's strange predicament. But even that sort of interest was dying out when, looking to his left, he saw the accustomed shapes of the other bungalows looming in the night, and remembered the arrival of the thirsty company in the boat. Wang could hardly risk such a crime in the presence of other white men. It was a peculiar instance of the safety in numbers principle, which somehow was not much to Haste's taste. He went in gloomily and stood over the empty drawer in deep and unsatisfactory thought. He had just made up his mind that he must breathe nothing of this to the girl, when he heard her voice behind him. She had taken him by surprise, but he resisted the impulse to turn round at once under the impression that she might read his trouble in his face. Yes, she had taken him by surprise, and for that reason the conversation which began was not exactly as he would have conducted it if he had been prepared for her point-blank question. He ought to have said at once, "I've missed nothing." It was a deplorable thing that he should have let it come so far as to have her ask what it was he missed. He closed the conversation by saying lightly, "It's an object of very small value. Don't worry about it. It isn't worthwhile. The best you can do is go and lie down again, Lena." Reluctantly she turned away, and only in the doorway asked, "And you?" "I think I shall smoke a cheroot on the veranda. I don't feel sleepy for the moment." "Well, don't be long." He made no answer. She saw him standing there, very still, with a frown on his brow, and slowly drooped the curtain. Hayes did really light a cheroot before going out again on the veranda. He glanced up from under the low eaves to see by the stars how the night went on. It was going very slowly. Why it should have irked him he did not know, for he had nothing to expect from the dawn, but everything round him had become unreasonable, unsettled, and vaguely urgent, laying him under an obligation, but giving him no line of action. He felt contemptuously irritated with the situation. The outer world had broken upon him, and he did not know what wrong he had done to bring this on himself, any more than he knew what he had done to provoke the horrible calumny about his treatment of poor Morrison. For he could not forget this. It had reached the ears of one who had needed to have the most perfect confidence in the rectitude of his conduct. And she only half disbelieves it, he thought, with hopeless humiliation. This moral stab in the back seemed to have taken some of his strength from him, as a physical wound would have done. He had no desire to do anything, neither to bring Wang to terms in the matter of the revolver, nor to find out from the strangers who they were, and how their predicament had come about. He flung his glowing cigar away into the night. But Samburan was no longer a solitude wherein he could indulge all his moods. The fiery parabolic path the cast-out stump traced in the air was seen from another veranda at a distance of some 20 yards. It was noted as a symptom of importance by an observer with his faculties greedy for signs, and in a state of alertness tense enough almost to hear the grass grow.